The Architecture of Sleep, Part 1, The Arch. Welcome to this quiet space. The day is behind you now. Every task, every conversation, and every worry has been set aside. You are currently in a room of absolute stillness. Imagine a vast, private library at night. The walls are lined with heavy, leather-bound volumes. The only light comes from a single, warm lamp on a dark wood desk. The air is cool and still. Tonight, we are not looking for excitement. We are looking for the comfort of cold stone and the precision of ancient geometry. We are going to study the architecture of the arch. We are going to consider the way gravity is managed by form. We are going to look at the terminology of masonry, piece by piece, until the mind finds rest in the repetition of technical detail. Focus your mind on a single point of stone. We begin with the arch. An arch is a vertical curved structure that spans an elevated space. It may or may not support the weight above it. In our case, we consider the masonry arch held together by the force of compression. Consider the foundation. The arch does not begin in the air. It begins on the ground or upon a wall. We call the support that receives the weight of the arch the abutment. The abutment is solid. It is unmoving. It is the anchor. Rising from the abutment is the pier. The pier is the solid mass between two openings. It is thick. It is calculated. It is heavy. On top of the pier, we find the impost. The impost is a horizontal masonry unit. It is the block from which the arch begins to curve. Imagine the impost now, a flat, cold surface of granite or limestone. It waits to receive the curve. From the impost, we find the springing line. This is an imaginary horizontal line. It connects the 2 points where the curve of the arch starts. Below this line is the vertical support. Above this line is the beginning of the arc. Now we look at the stones that make the curve. These are not square stones. They are wedge-shaped. They are called voussoirs. Voussoirs. Each voussoir is cut with precision. The sides of the voussoir are not parallel. They radiate from a single center point. Think about the first voussoir. It rests on the impost. We call this the springer. It is the stone that bridges the gap between the vertical and the curved. It sits at an angle. It is the first step in the journey of the arc. Above the springer, we place another voussoir and another. Each one is tilted slightly more than the last. Each one leans toward the center. We consider the joints between the stones. These are the mortar joints. They are thin. They are uniform. They distribute the pressure evenly across the surface of the stone. We move our focus to the inner curve of the arch. This inner surface is called the intrados. The intrados is smooth. It is the belly of the arch. If you were to stand beneath the arch and look up, you would be looking at the intrados. It is a perfect mathematical line. We trace it from left to right, slow, steady. Now we look at the outer curve. This is the extrados. The extrados is the exterior boundary of the stones. It is often hidden within the wall, but its geometry is just as important as the inner curve. Between the intrados and the extrados is the thickness of the arch. This is the depth of the voussoirs. In a stable arch, this thickness is constant. It provides the mass necessary to resist the internal forces of gravity. We continue up the curve. We reach the haunch. The haunch is the section of the arch located roughly halfway between the springing line and the top. This is where the arch is most likely to fail if not properly supported. It is the point of greatest outward thrust. We acknowledge the haunch. We acknowledge the weight it carries. Finally, we reach the highest point, the crown. At the very center of the crown sits the most important stone of all, the keystone. The keystone is a wedge-shaped stone at the apex of the masonry arch. It is the final piece placed during construction. Until the keystone is in place, the arch cannot stand on its own. It requires a wooden frame called centering. But once the keystone is driven into the center, the wooden frame is removed. The arch becomes self-supporting. The keystone does not just sit there. It locks all the other voussoirs into position. It transforms the weight of the stones into a lateral force. This force travels down through the haunches, through the springers, through the imposts, and finally into the abutments. Everything is in equilibrium. The compression is perfect. The stone is silent. Consider the spandrel. The spandrel is the space between the extrados of the arch and the rectangular enclosure above it. It is often a triangular space. It is filled with secondary masonry. It is quiet space. It serves no structural purpose other than to fill the gap. We focus on the emptiness of the spandrel. Now, let us repeat these terms slowly. Let them settle in the mind like dust on an old blueprint. The abutment, solid and deep. The impost, the horizontal transition. The springing line, the beginning of the curve. The springer, the first tilted stone. The voussoir, the wedge, the radiator, the intrados, the inner line of peace, the extrados, the outer boundary of form, the haunch, the point of pressure, the crown, the summit, the keystone, the lock, the finality. We visualize the arch in the dark, a Roman arch, semicircular, perfect. It has stood for 2,000 years. It does not move. It does not breathe. It simply exists in a state of constant, peaceful compression. The molecules of the stone are pressed together. They are held in place by the weight of the earth. There is no tension here, only compression. Compression is a resting force. It is the force of being settled. Think of the span. The span is the horizontal distance between the supports. A wide span requires a higher rise. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on the right, and the keystone in the center. 15 stones in total. 15 stones of perfect, heavy, silent rest. Having examined the arch, we turn now to the vertical permanence of the column, specifically the Doric Order. This is the oldest and simplest of the classical orders. It is characterized by its austerity and its immense strength. Imagine a great temple of white marble. The air is cool and smells of dust and ancient stone. We begin at the very bottom. Unlike other styles, the Doric column has no individual base. It does not rest on a pedestal or a decorated plinth. Instead, it sits directly upon the stylobate. The stylobate is the topmost course of a three-stepped platform. We consider the flat, level surface of the stylobate. It is the foundation. It is perfectly horizontal. It is unyielding. Each column stands firmly upon it, spaced at regular intervals. We move our attention to the shaft. The shaft is the main body of the column. It is not a perfect cylinder. If it were a perfect cylinder, it would appear thin and weak to the human eye. To correct this, the ancient builders used a technique called entasis. Entasis is a very slight, almost imperceptible swelling in the middle of the shaft. It is a mathematical curve. It gives the column a sense of organic life, as if it is gently breathing under the weight of the stone above. We visualize this subtle curve. It starts narrow at the bottom, reaches its widest point about 1/3 of the way up, and tapers again toward the top. Now, look at the surface of the shaft. It is not smooth. It is carved with vertical channels called fluting. In the Doric order, there are usually 20 flutes. These channels are shallow and concave. In the Doric style, these flutes meet at a sharp edge. This edge is called the aris, arisis. We follow the line of a single aris from the base to the top. It is a long, straight line of shadow and light. Because the column is circular, the light hits the fluting differently on each side. Some flutes are in deep shadow. Some are in bright light. Most are in a soft, gray middle ground. This repetition of shadow and light creates a rhythm, a visual pulse. We count the flutes as we move around the column. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm is steady. The rhythm is calming. As we reach the top of the shaft, we find the capital. The capital is the head of the column. In the Doric order, the capital is divided into two distinct parts. The first part, resting directly on the shaft, is the echinus. The echinus is a circular, cushion-like stone. It flares outward, bridging the gap between the circular shaft and the square block above. Its profile is a simple, stiff curve. It looks like it is supporting a great weight with ease. On top of the echinus sits the abacus. The abacus is a simple, heavy, square block. It has no decoration. It has no carving. It is a pure geometric form. Its purpose is to receive the horizontal beams of the roof and distribute that weight down into the shaft. Square on circle, circle on shaft, shaft on stylobate. The architecture is a series of transitions, vertical to horizontal, shadow to light, weight to support. We let the simplicity of the Doric column settle in the mind. It is solid. It is ancient. It is at rest. We leave the capital of the column behind and look upward. Resting heavily upon the square abacus is the entablature. This is the collective name for all the horizontal elements supported by the columns. It is the weight that the columns were born to carry. The entablature is divided into 3 distinct horizontal layers. The lowest layer, sitting directly on the columns, is the architrave. In the Doric Order, the architrave is a series of plain, heavy stone beams. It has no carvings. It has no patterns. It is a pure expression of structural strength. We consider the architrave. It spans the gap from the center of one column to the center of the next. It is thick. It is solid. Its only purpose is to act as a bridge. We follow its horizontal line. It is perfectly straight. It is perfectly level. The gray stone of the architrave absorbs the low light of the archive room. It is a symbol of absolute stability. Above the architrave, we find the second layer, the frieze. This is where the Doric order becomes more complex, yet remains strictly rhythmic. The Doric frieze is famous for its alternating pattern of 2 elements, the triglyph and the metope. A triglyph is a rectangular block with 3 vertical grooves carved into its face. These grooves are called glyphs. 2 full grooves in the center and 2 half grooves at the edges. Teriglyph. We count them. 1, 2, 3 represent the ends of wooden beams from even older temples, now immortalized in unmoving stone. Between every 2 triglyphs is a square space called a metope. Mate to ope. In our study, the metope is a smooth, flat surface. It provides a moment of visual rest between the vertical lines of the triglyphs. We look at the pattern: triglyph, metope, triglyph, metope. The pattern never breaks. It continues around the entire perimeter of the building. It is a heartbeat of architecture. It is predictable. It is mathematical. It requires nothing from you but to observe its repetition. Finally, at the very top of the entablature, we reach the cornice. The cornice is the crowning member. It projects outward, away from the face of the building. Its purpose is to throw rainwater away from the columns below. We consider the overhang of the cornice. It creates a deep, permanent shadow. Underneath the projecting part of the cornice, there are small, flat blocks called mutules. Each mutual is decorated with rows of tiny stone pegs called gutta. There are 18 gutta on each mutual, 3 rows of 6. We do not need to count them all. We only need to know they are there, precise and hidden in the shade. The entire structure is now complete in our mind. The stylobate at the bottom, the fluted shaft, the capital, the architrave, the rhythmic frieze, and the projecting cornice. The temple stands in the dark. The stone is cold. The geometry is perfect. Everything is in its proper place. The weight travels down. The ground pushes up. The air is still. You are safe within the logic of the stone. Sleep Story Part 4. The Foundations and Substructure. We move our focus now downward, away from the sunlight and the decorative frieze, and descend beneath the visible surface of the temple. To understand the endurance of the stone, we must examine the hidden work of the foundations. Beneath, the stylobate, the topmost step we discussed earlier lies the stereobate. The stereobate is the remaining mass of the platform. It consists of several layers of roughly hewn stone, known as ashlar masonry. These stones are not polished like the columns above. They are coarse. They are heavy. They are meant only to be strong. Beneath the stereobate, we find the euthenteria. This is the leveling course. It is the first layer of stone laid above the ground. The masons spent weeks ensuring the euthenteria was perfectly level, using only water and long channels of wood. If the euthenteria is off by even a fraction of an inch, the columns at the top will eventually lean. We consider the absolute horizontal precision of this hidden layer. It is the silent, level truth of the building. Deeper still, we reach the packing layers. Before any stone was laid, the ancient builders dug deep trenches into the earth. They filled these trenches with layers of packed rubble and clay. We imagine the sound of the heavy wooden rammers, thump, thump, compacting the earth until it is as hard as the rock itself. We consider the soil composition. In many of these sites, the soil is a mixture of limestone fragments and dense red clay. This soil is stable. It does not shrink or swell with the rain. It holds the weight of the temple in a permanent, cold grip. Think of the pressure. Every column above weighs many tons. That weight travels down through the shaft, through the stylobate, through the layers of the stereobate, and finally spreads out into the compacted earth of the foundation. The weight is no longer a burden. It is a source of stability. Imagine the friction between the grains of sand in the soil. They are pressed so tightly together that they cannot move. They are locked. There is no vibration here. There is no sound. It is a world of static, pressurized silence. We visualize the spread, footing. This is the technique where the foundation is made wider than the wall it supports. This spreads the weight over a larger area of ground, reducing the pressure on any single point. It is a gentle, heavy distribution. Like a hand resting on a soft pillow, the temple rests upon the earth. We stay in this subterranean space for a moment. It is dark. It is cool. The temperature never changes here. Summer and winter are the same in the foundation. It is a place of total thermal and structural equilibrium. The earth supports the stone. The stone supports the column. The column supports the architrave. Everything is connected in a single, unbroken chain of support. You are at the very bottom of that chain. You are resting on the most stable part of the world. Sleep Story Part 5. The Stereotomy of Stone. We leave the dark foundations and move back into the light of the workshop. Here, we observe the stereotomy. This is the science of the cutting of solids. It is the process by which a raw, irregular block of stone is transformed into a perfect architectural unit. The process begins at the quarry. Imagine a wall of solid limestone. The stone has been resting there for millions of years. The masons use iron wedges to split a massive block from the face of the cliff. This block is called a quarry block. It is rough. It is heavy. It is undressed. We follow the block to the site. The first step in stereotomy is the creation. of the bed. The bed is the bottom surface of the stone. It must be perfectly flat. The mason uses a straight edge and a square. He chips away the high points, slowly, grain by grain. He uses a fine powder of red chalk on his straight edge to find the tiny imperfections. Where the chalk leaves a mark, the stone is too high. He scrapes it down. He repeats this again and again. Once the bed is flat, we consider the joints. These are the vertical sides of the stone. They must be perfectly perpendicular to the bed. The mason uses a large metal square. He checks the angle, 90 degrees. He checks it again. The precision required is measured in the thickness of a single hair. When two stones meet in a dry joint, there is no mortar. The stones must touch so perfectly that the line between them is almost invisible. We consider the draft. This is a narrow, smooth border carved around the edges of a stone's face. The center of the stone might remain rough, a style called rustication, but the draft must be perfectly smooth to ensure a tight fit with the neighboring stone. We visualize the mason's chisel moving at a steady, rhythmic pace. Tap, tap. The most complex work in stereotomy involves the voussoirs of the arch we studied earlier. Each voussoir has two radiating joints. These are not square. They are cut at a precise angle that points toward the center of the arch's circle. To get this angle right, the mason uses a template or a mold. This is a wooden pattern cut to the exact degree required. The mason lays the template on the stone. He traces the line. He begins to remove the waste material. He is not just cutting stone. He is carving geometry. He considers the camber the slight upward curve. He considers the anatherosis, the technique where only the edges of the joint are polished smooth, while the center is hollowed out slightly to ensure the edges meet perfectly. We think about the friction. When these stones are placed together, the weight of the building presses the smooth surfaces against each other. The friction is so great that the stones become like a single piece of the earth. There is no movement. There is no vibration. There is only the static weight of the stereotomic plan. We visualize a single block of marble. It is cool. It is white. It is perfectly square on 5 sides and curved on the 6th. It is ready. It is placed into the wall. It fits. It settles. It begins its long, silent watch, supporting the weight of the centuries. Sleep Story Part 6. The Mechanics of Elevation. We move our focus now to the slow, deliberate movement of the stone from the earth to the sky. We consider the transport and lifting mechanics. This is the study of how immense weight is overcome by the simple application of mechanical advantage. Imagine the block we have just dressed. It weighs several tons. To move it from the workshop to the temple site, it is placed upon a sledge. This is a heavy wooden frame with thick runners. The ground before the sledge is covered in rounded wooden rollers, trunks of cedar or oak, stripped of their bark. As the sledge is pulled forward by teams of oxen, the rollers at the back are freed. They are picked up one by one and carried to the front. We visualize this cycle, the slow roll, the release of the timber, the placement of the timber. The process is rhythmic. It is a slow, heavy crawl across the landscape. The friction is managed. The weight is in constant, low-velocity motion. Once the stone reaches the foot of the temple, it must be lifted. We examine the polyspaston, or the great crane. This is a tall wooden derrick, anchored by thick hemp ropes. At its heart is the windlass, a horizontal barrel around which the rope is coiled. We consider the pulley blocks. A single pulley only changes the direction of the force, but a system of multiple pulleys, the block and tackle, multiplies the force. For every loop of rope added to the system, the weight of the stone feels lighter to the men turning the windlass. We focus on the mechanical ratio, a 4-to-1 ratio, an 8-to-1 ratio. The weight is traded for distance. The rope itself is made of twisted hemp fibers. We imagine the tension in the rope. It is pulled taut. It hums with a low, deep vibration under the strain. The stone begins to rise. It does not move quickly. It moves inch by inch. A slow, vertical ascent. To grip the stone, the masons use Lewis bolts or U-shaped cramps. A Lewis bolt is a clever, wedge-shaped iron device inserted into a specially carved hole in the top of the stone. As the rope pulls upward, the wedges expand, gripping the inside of the stone with immovable force. The heavier the stone, the tighter the grip. The stone reaches its height. It hangs there in the air, perfectly balanced. The men at the windlass hold the tension. The crane arm swings slowly, a movement called slewing. The stone is positioned over its final resting place in the wall or the column. The descent is even slower than the ascent. The rope is let out, grain by grain. The stone settles onto its bed. The Lewis bolt is loosened. The tension in the hemp rope vanishes. The crane stands tall and empty, waiting for the next block. We consider the stillness that follows. The heavy stone has found its home. It will not move again for 1,000 years. The ropes are coiled. The windlass is locked. The site is quiet. The only thing remaining is the steady, downward pressure of the stone, pushing into the earth, perfectly at rest. Sleep Story Part 7. The chemistry of volcanic ash. We turn our attention now from the mechanical lifting of stone to the chemical creation of it. We examine opus cementitium, or Roman concrete. Unlike modern concrete, this ancient material was not poured as a liquid. It was layered as a dense, mineral-rich mass. The secret to this enduring strength lies in the pozzolana. This is a fine reddish-brown volcanic ash found near Mount Vesuvius. We consider the nature of this ash. It is composed of silica and aluminotiny, glass-like fragments created in the heat of a volcanic eruption. These fragments are chemically hungry. They are waiting for a partner. That partner is quicklime. To create quicklime, the Romans took limestone and heated it in a kiln to over 900 degrees Celsius. This process drives out the carbon dioxide, leaving behind a white, powdery substance that is chemically aggressive. We imagine the heat of the kiln. the slow transformation of the solid rock into a reactive powder. Now we observe the mixing process. This is the hydraulic reaction. When the volcanic pozzolana is mixed with the lime and a small amount of water, a chemical bond begins to form. Unlike air-dried mortar, this mixture does not need to dry to harden. It cures through a chemical reaction that can take place even underwater. We visualize the layering of the concrete. It is not a fast process. First, a layer of Comenta hand-sized chunks of broken brick or volcanic tuff is laid down into a wooden form. Then, the mortar mixture of lime and pozzolana is spread over the stones. Workers use heavy wooden rammers to pound the mixture down. Thump, thump, thump. This is done to remove any air pockets. We focus on the compaction. The mortar is forced into every tiny crevice between the stones. It becomes a single, dense, airless mass. Inside this mass, a microscopic miracle is occurring. The lime and the ash are forming calcium silicate hydrate crystals. These crystals grow like tiny, interlocking fingers, weaving the stones together. This process is slow. It takes weeks for the initial set and years for the full strength to be reached. We consider the decrystallization and recrystallization. When a tiny crack forms in Roman concrete, seawater or groundwater seeps in. This water dissolves the remaining lime in the mixture, which then recrystallizes into the crack, effectively healing the structure. The building is not dead. It is chemically active, constantly repairing its own microscopic wounds. We think about the Pantheon in Rome. Its great dome is made of this material. At the bottom, the concrete is thick and heavy, mixed with dense basalt. As it rises toward the top, the builders used lighter and lighter stones first tough, and finally porous pumice to reduce the weight. We visualize the chemistry of the dome. Tons of volcanic energy, frozen into a perfect silent curve. It has stood for 19 centuries. The chemical bonds are stronger today than they were when they were first formed. There is no movement. There is no decay. There is only the slow, eternal growth of the mineral crystals, holding the weight of the sky in a state of perfect chemical peace. Sleep Story Part 8. The Geometry of Silence. We shift our focus now from the weight of the stone to the behavior of the air within it. We examine the acoustics of the Epidaurus Theater. This is the study of how sound waves interact with hard, geometric surfaces to create a field of perfect auditory clarity. Imagine a vast, semicircular theater carved into the side of a limestone hill. The sun has set and the air is cooling. The stone seats the Carlin rise in 55 rows of concentric circles. We consider the material, reddish-gray limestone. It is a dense, non-porous rock. It does not absorb sound. It reflects it. We observe the seating profile. Each seat is not a flat slab. It has a specific carved lip. This is the secret to the acoustic filter. When a person speaks from the central circular stage, the orchestra, the sound waves travel outward in expanding spheres. When these waves hit the limestone seats, a phenomenon called Bragg's scattering occurs. The regular, Repetitive spacing of the stone rows acts as a natural filter for sound frequencies. The low-frequency noises, the rustle of wind in the trees, the distant murmur of the crowd, are trapped and suppressed by the gaps between the seats. Meanwhile, the high-frequency sounds, the human voice, the subtle intake of a breath, are reflected and amplified by the hard, limestone surfaces. We visualize the sound waves as ripples on a still pond, moving upward and outward, gaining clarity as they climb the slope. We consider the reflecting surfaces. The stone acts as a mirror for the voice. Because the limestone is so hard and the surface so smooth, the sound energy is not lost to heat or vibration. It remains intact. A whisper at the center of the orchestra can be heard in the very last row, nearly 60 meters away. We think about the time delay because sound travels at approximately 343 meters per second. There is a tiny, microscopic gap between the direct sound and the reflected sound. In a perfectly designed theater, this gap is less than 50 milliseconds. This prevents an echo. The two sounds merge into one, making the voice feel closer, richer, and more present. We focus on the orchestra floor. It is often made of hard-packed earth or marble. It reflects the sound upward toward the audience, acting as a secondary launch pad for the voice. We imagine the silence of the theater when it is empty. The air is heavy and still. Every tiny sound a pebble falling, a soft exhale, is captured by the geometry of the stone. But tonight, there is no one on the stage. There is no performance. The theater is simply a machine for listening to the silence. The limestone seats are cold. They have absorbed the coolness of the night. The concentric circles of the theater hold the air in a giant protective bowl. The low-frequency sounds of the world are filtered away, leaving only the high-frequency stillness. We stay in the center of the orchestra. We look up at the rows of stone rising into the dark. It is a world of perfect mathematical hearing. There is no noise here. There is only the peaceful, geometric reflection of the quiet. Yet vital to the soul of the building, we examine entasis. This is the subtle, intentional convex curve applied to the shaft of a column. To the untrained eye, the column appears perfectly straight. But in reality, it is a complex mathematical swell. Consider the problem of optical distortion. When the human eye looks at a perfectly vertical, straight-sided cylinder against a bright sky, the sides appear to dip inward. The column looks starved or weak in the center. To correct this trick of the mind, the architects introduced a slight bulge. We consider the necessity of this correction. It is a lie told in stone to tell a truth in the eye. We look at the mathematical profile. The entasis is not a simple arc of a circle. It is often a hyperbola or a parabola. We imagine the master architect at the quarry. He does not guess. He uses a stretched chord and a series of offsets. Imagine a long, straight baseline representing the center of the column. At specific intervals, perhaps every 2 feet, the architect measures outward. At the base, the radius is at its widest. As we move up, the radius increases by a fraction of a millimeter, just enough to create the swell. Then, as we move toward the top, the radius begins to decrease again, more sharply than it began. We consider the ratios. In the Parthenon, the maximum swell occurs at about 2/5 of the height of the shaft. The total amount of this swell is less than 2 centimeters over height of 10 meters. It is a measurement so small it can barely be felt with the hand, yet the mind perceives it as strength. To carve this curve, the masons use a vertical template. This is a long piece of flexible wood, bent to the exact mathematical curve required. They place the template against the rough stone of the shaft. They carve until the stone meets the wood perfectly. We focus on the repetitive motion of the chisel, following the curve. Tap, tap. Think about the curvature of the stylobate. It is not just the columns that are curved. The very floor of the temple, the stylobate, is curved upward in the center. If you were to place a marble at one end of a 100-foot temple floor, you would not be able to see it from the other end. The floor rises like the surface of the earth. This curvature is repeated in the architrave and the cornice. The entire building is a collection of subtle, interlocking curves. There are no truly straight lines in a Greek temple. It is a structure of tension and release. We visualize the math, the horizontal curves, the vertical swells, the inward leaning of the columns. If the lines of the columns were extended miles into the sky, they would eventually meet at a single point, creating a giant, invisible pyramid. The building is not a box. It is a fragment of a larger, celestial geometry. Every stone is cut at a unique angle to accommodate these curves. No two stones are exactly alike. They are individuals, held together by a shared mathematical purpose. We let the numbers drift away. The millimeters, the ratios, the offsets. They settle into the stone, becoming part of the weight. The column is solid. The curve is perfect. The building is at rest, breathing in its invisible geometric swell. Sleep Story Part 10. The mineralogy of earth and metal. We shift our focus now from the shape of the stone to its surface. While we often imagine ancient temples as pure white marble, they were once vibrant with color. We examine the mineralogy of pigments, the process of turning the Earth's crust into a permanent, decorative finish. Imagine the workshop of the painter. It is a quiet room filled with small ceramic bowls and heavy stone mortar. There is no synthetic dye here. Every color is a product of the earth, a stable mineral that has existed for eons. We consider the source of these colors. They are not light. They are heavy. They are elemental. We begin with hematite. This is the source of the deep, earthy red found on the temple's frieze. Hematite is an iron oxide. We imagine the raw ore a heavy, reddish-black stone. The apprentice takes a piece of hematite and begins to grind it against a granite slab. The sound is a low, rhythmic rasp. Grind, pause, grind. Slowly, the solid rock turns into a fine, silky powder. The more it is ground, the richer the color becomes. We focus on the fine dust. It is stable. It does not fade in the sun. It is the color of the Earth's core. Next, we look at Egyptian blue. This is one of the first synthetic pigments, created through a slow, high-heat process. It is a mixture of silica, lime, and copper. These ingredients are placed in a kiln and fired for many hours at a temperature of over 800 degrees. Inside the heat, the copper oxidizes and bonds with the silica, creating a crystalline blue glass. Once cooled, this blue glass is crushed into a powder. The size of the grains determines the shade. Coarse grains create a deep, midnight blue. Fine grains create a soft, sky-like cerulean. We consider the crystalline structure of the blue. Each tiny grain is a fragment of glass, reflecting the light in a quiet, fractured way. Now we consider the binder. A pigment cannot stick to stone on its own. It needs a medium. The ancients often used encaustic, a mixture of beeswax and resin. We imagine the wax being gently heated in a bronze pot. It melts into a clear, golden liquid. The mineral powder is stirred into the hot wax. The liquid becomes thick and saturated with color. The painter applies it to the marble while it is still warm. The wax penetrates the microscopic pores of the stone. As it cools, it hardens, locking the mineral grains into the very surface of the marble. This is not a layer of paint. It is a permanent fusion of stone and earth. We visualize the application. The painter moves slowly. The brush is made of soft animal hair. He fills the background of the metopes with blue. He highlights the triglyphs with deep red. He adds touches of yellow ochre, hydrated iron oxide to the details of the cornice. The colors are not bright or jarring. They are deep, matte, and heavy. They feel like the minerals they are. We think about the chemistry of the surface. The beeswax protects the stone from the rain. The minerals reflect the sun. Over centuries, the wax will slowly wear away, but the mineral dust remains trapped in the grain of the marble. Even today, if you look closely at the sheltered corners of an ancient temple, you can see the faint red ghost of the hematite. The workshop is quiet now. The mortar are still. The powders are covered. The temple stands in the dark, its colors muted by the moonlight, its surface protected by the ancient chemistry of the earth. Everything is settled. Everything is permanent. Sleep Story Part 11. The hydrology of the deep stone. We shift our focus now from the dry minerals of the surface to the cool, dark world of the subterranean cistern. To sustain a temple or a city, the ancients had to master the collection and storage of water. We examine the architecture of the void, the spaces carved out to hold the life of the earth. Imagine a grand chamber located deep beneath the limestone pavement. This is the cistern. It is a world of total darkness and absolute thermal stability. The air here is damp and heavy, carrying the faint, clean scent of wet rock. We consider the collection surface. Every inch of the temple's marble roof and the vast stone courtyard is designed with a subtle, intentional slope. When the rain falls, it does not sit. It moves. It flows toward the gutter or the cyma. From the cyma, the water is directed through the mouths of stone. lions the gargoyles, and into vertical shafts hidden within the walls. We follow the water as it falls. It is a vertical journey through the heart of the masonry. The sound is a muffled, distant echo. Drip, plash, drip. Before the water enters the main reservoir, it passes through the settling basin. This is a smaller, intermediate chamber. Here, the water slows down. It becomes still. In this stillness, the heavy particles, the sand, the dust, the mineral fragments sink to the bottom. Before the water enters the main reservoir, it passes through the settling basin. This is a smaller, intermediate chamber. Here, the water slows down. It becomes still. In this stillness, the heavy particles, the sand, the dust, the mineral fragments sink to the bottom. We visualize the sediment slowly descending through the water column. It is a slow-motion rain of earth. One grain at a time, the water purifies itself through the simple application of gravity and time. The water that overflows into the main cistern is clear, cold, and silent. The main cistern is often a masterpiece of engineering. To support the weight of the earth and the temple above, the chamber is filled with rows of stone columns. These columns support a series of groin vaults. We consider the geometry of the ceiling. It is a forest of arches, reflecting off the surface of the water. The walls of the cistern are coated in opus signinum. This is a special type of waterproof mortar made from lime, sand, and crushed fragments of terracotta pottery. The terracotta gives the mortar a pinkish hue and, more importantly, a hydraulic property that allows it to harden in the presence of moisture. We consider the thermal mass because the cistern is surrounded by meters of solid rock. The water stays at a constant temperature of about 15 degrees Celsius, regardless of the heat on the surface. It is a massive heat sink, cooling the earth around it. We listen to the sound of the reservoir. There is no wind here. There is no current. The water is a perfect black mirror. Occasionally, a single drop falls from the ceiling, creating a ripple that expands slowly until it touches the distant limestone wall. Up, over, down. The water moves by the pull of the earth alone. There are no pumps. There are no machines. Only the immutable law of the level. The cistern is full. The stone is saturated. The city above sleeps, supported by the cold, deep silence of the stored rain. Sleep Story Part 12. The chronology of the weathered stone. We conclude our journey by observing the temple not as a new creation, but as a silent witness to the passing of centuries. We examine the weathering of the stone, the slow, microscopic process by which the landscape reclaims the geometry of the architect. Imagine the temple in the late evening light, thousands of years after the last mason has put down his chisel. The sharp 90-degree angles we discussed, the crisp arris of the Doric column, and the precise corners of the abacus have begun to soften. This is the process of subaerial denudation. We consider the action of the wind. Over centuries, the wind carries microscopic grains of sand and dust. These grains strike the marble surface at low velocity. It is a process of natural polishing. 1 micron at a time, the polished surface is etched, becoming matte and tactile. The stone loses its cold, artificial shine and takes on a soft, velvet-like texture that holds the warmth of the sun. Next, we look at the lichen. These are not plants, but symbiotic organisms, a union of fungi and algae. They appear as small, crusty patches of silver, orange, and pale green on the sheltered sides of the columns. We focus on their growth. It is the slowest movement in nature. A lichen may take 100 years to grow the width of a finger. The lichen secretes weak organic acids. These acids slowly dissolve the calcium carbonate of the marble, creating tiny pits and hollows. This is biogenic weathering. It turns the smooth stone into a complex, miniature landscape of peaks and valleys. This new texture provides a home for moss, which traps moisture and further cools the stone. The temple is no longer a separate object. It is becoming an ecosystem. We consider the final settlement. Over the millennia, the great weight of the structure has caused the earth beneath the foundation to compress to its absolute limit. The eutheria and the steriobate have merged with the bedrock. Any microscopic gaps that once existed between the stones have been filled with mineral deposits, calcite and quartz carried by rainwater. The building has become a single monolithic entity. It no longer sits on the hill. It is a part of the hill. The horizontal thrust of the arches and the vertical pressure of the columns have found a permanent, unchanging equilibrium. The forces have reached a state of zero motion. We visualize the patina. This is the skin of the stone. Through a process called oxidation, the trace amounts of iron within the marble react with the air, turning the white stone into a warm, golden honey color. This is the color of time. It is a protective layer, a shield created by the stone itself to resist further decay. The sun has now completely set. The wind has died down. The temple stands in the absolute silence of the night. The geometry is still there. The keystone is still holding the arch. The entasis is still correcting the eye, but it is now a part of the natural order. The stone is cold. The lichen is still. The foundation is locked. The math has become a memory, and the memory has become the earth. There is nothing left to build. There is nothing left to calculate. Everything is finished. Everything is level. Everything is at rest.